Enter, dear friend, into the saga of Shattered Psyche, a narrative tapestry richly spun by the creative minds at StoryWave.ai. Show your camaraderie by liking, sharing, and subscribing for daily adventures in storytelling. Chapter 1: The Echo of Screams. I tried to unshackle myself from the driver's seat, my movements jagged, frenetic, as if each frantic jerk could undo the last few moments. The taste of iron flooded my mouth, a stark reminder of the reality I was desperately trying to escape. My wristwatch, the one bearing the delicate script of my wife's love, was smeared with blood, its glass face shattered like the world around me. "Paul!" I screamed again into the void that answered back with mocking silence. The agony ripping through my chest wasn't just from the jagged shards of metal that ensnared me. It was the unbearable thought of my son, my little wolf, hurt or worse, alone. The night air was acrid, thick with the stench of gasoline and smoke. I could hear the distant wail of sirens, a hopeful yet harrowing sound, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. My vision, blurred by pain and panic, made the world seem like a nightmarish watercolor, reds and blues bleeding into each other. Suddenly, a face appeared outside the shattered window, a visage marked by concern and urgency. "Sir, can you hear me?" It was a woman's voice, tinged with an accent I couldn't place, soft yet commanding. I tried to focus on her features, but my mind was a whirlpool with only one thought: Paul. "He's my son. He's in the car." I managed to gasp out, the words like shards of glass in my mouth. "Sir, there's no one else here," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. "It's just you. Help is on the way." No, that couldn't be. I refused to accept it. Paul was here. He had to be. The memory came crashing back, the laughter, the music playing softly from the radio, then the blinding headlights and the world turning upside down. My boy was here, and I needed to find him. The sirens grew louder, a crescendo that seemed to synchronize with the throbbing in my skull. Hands reached in to extricate me from the mangled car, their touch both salvation and condemnation. As they pulled me free, the cold night air embraced me, a cruel contrast to the warmth I sought. Through the haze I saw her again, the woman with the colorful scarves, her face etched with empathy. "We're going to take care of you," she assured me, as I was laid onto a stretcher. "Paul," I whispered, the name a prayer, a plea, a mantra. The stretcher lifted, and I floated, the world tilting once more. The echo of screams, my own, filled the night, mingling with the symphony of approaching sirens. They were taking me away from the wreckage, from the place where my son had to be. "Don't let them take me." I cried out, my voice a cracked and desperate thing. But the faces around me were a blur, their words indistinct. My consciousness waned, the battle against the darkness all-consuming. And as the black tide rose to claim me, I clung to the fading echo of my son's laughter, the phantom embrace of his presence. My mind, fractured and spiraling, refused to relinquish the search for truth amid the shards of reality. As the ambulance doors closed, sealing me within a cocoon of sterile light and urgent whispers, a single, haunting question remained: where was Paul? Chapter 2: A World of Disbelief. "Mr. Harris," a voice cut through the silence, a voice belonging to a figure cloaked in blue scrubs. It was Dr. Miller, his tone clinical yet not devoid of concern. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" The question seemed misplaced, as if any answer could encapsulate the maelstrom of confusion and fear that churned within me. "My son Paul," I rasped, each word a struggle against the dryness of my throat. "Where is he? Is he all right?" Dr. Miller's expression morphed, the lines of his face softening into a mask of professional sympathy. "Donald, we've been over this," he began, the words measured and deliberate. "You were alone in the car. There was no child." His statement was a lance through my already fragile grasp on reality. "No, that's impossible," I countered, my voice growing in strength as anger and disbelief surged through me. "He was there beside me. We were talking, laughing." Emily, with her sparrow-like spirit and eyes that held a world of empathy, stood by the door. Her presence was a comfort, though the concern etched deep in her features did nothing to ease the gnawing doubt that had taken root in my mind. "Donald," Emily spoke, her voice a gentle melody that sought to soothe. "You've been through a lot. Maybe you're just confused right now. It's normal after such a trauma." Her words, meant to be a balm, only served to inflame my growing distrust. "Confused?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "I know my own son." Dr. Miller exchanged a look with Emily, a silent conversation that I wasn't privy to, but one I interpreted as doubt in my sanity. "We can discuss this more later," he said. "Right now, you need to rest. We'll make sure you get the help you need." Help? What sort of help could erase the memory of a son I knew existed? What sort of help could convince me that the laughter and love I carried in my heart was nothing but a figment of my imagination? Monty, the bear of a man with a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, stepped forward, his presence a solid reassurance in the room of ghosts. "Hey, Don," he said, his deep voice carrying a note of solemnity. "You gave us all a scare. Just take it easy, brother. We're here for you." I wanted to believe him, to lean on the support my friends offered, but the chasm between my memories and their reality was too wide, too deep. "He's real," I insisted, the words less for them and more for myself. "I have to find him." The room fell into a weighted hush, the beeping of machines filling the void where my son's laughter should have been. I lay back against the pillows, the softness a mockery of the comfort I sought, and turned my gaze to the window where the world outside moved on, oblivious to the shattering of my psyche. In the coming days, I knew I would have to navigate the labyrinth of doubt and disbelief, to search for the truth that seemed to slip like sand through my fingers. But for now, I held on to the echo of my son's existence, a phantom tether to the world I feared I was losing. Chapter 3: Shadows of Doubt. "Please," I urged, my voice a mere thread of despair as I addressed the nurse who was methodically adjusting the IV drip beside me. "You must believe me. My son, Paul, he's out there somewhere. He needs me." The nurse, a woman with lines of care etched into her face, met my gaze. Her name was Clara. I remembered from the countless times she had been in to check on me. "Donald," she began, patience woven into her words, "we've been through every record, every police report. There's no evidence of a child. You need to focus on your recovery." Her words were meant to comfort, but they struck with the force of a sledgehammer, fracturing the remnants of hope I clung to. "But my memories," I persisted, "they're as real as this room, as real as you standing before me." Clara sighed, a note of sympathy in her sigh. "Trauma can play tricks on the mind," she said. "The mind creates realities to cope with the inexplicable. It's a defense mechanism." Defense mechanism? My memories were not shields to deflect the blows of an unfathomable reality. They were the very essence of my being. Paul's laughter, the weight of his small hand in mine, the boundless joy in his eyes, could these intimate moments be mere phantoms of my psyche? As if on cue, Monty walked in, his frame filling the doorway. His presence was always a comfort, but today it was a reminder of the world that continued to turn outside my confined reality. "Talk to me, Don," Monty said, easing himself into the chair beside my bed. "Tell me about Paul. Tell me everything." And so I spoke. My voice carried the weight of a father's love as I recounted ball games in the park, bedtime stories filled with dragons and heroes, and quiet mornings of shared pancakes and laughter. Each word painted a vivid picture of a boy whose existence was as undeniable to me as the beating of my own heart. Monty listened, his brown eyes never leaving mine, his expression a mask of concentration. When I finished, he leaned back, his tattoo sleeve stretching with the movement. "Don," he said, his voice a rumble of thoughtfulness, "your stories, they're detailed, full of love. But have you considered that maybe, just maybe, your mind is trying to protect you from something? Protect me?" The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Was my mind my own worst enemy, crafting illusions to shield me from a truth too painful to confront? "Look," Monty continued, cracking his knuckles in a familiar gesture of unease, "I'm not saying I don't believe you, but we've turned the city upside down. There's no trace of Paul, no school records, no medical records, nothing." His words, though spoken with care, were a gut punch to my already wavering conviction. The dichotomy of my vivid memories and the stark denial of Paul's existence by those around me was a chasm too wide to bridge. As Monty stood to leave, promising to return with Emily, I was left alone with the shadows of doubt that crept along the walls, whispering insidious thoughts. My plea for understanding, for belief, had indeed fallen on deaf ears. The despair that followed was a dark cloak, smothering the flames of hope that had once burned so brightly within me. In the measured pace of the room's silence, I contemplated the possibility that my memories were a mirage, a cruel trick of a shattered psyche. Yet within me, The echo of a boy's laughter refused to be silenced, a stubborn illuminator in the fog of doubt. And so I held on, to the belief, to the love, to the resolute conviction that somewhere, somehow, my son Paul was waiting for me. Chapter 4: The Seed of Conspiracy. I summoned Emily, who arrived with her characteristic swish of colorful scarves and a sketchbook under her arm. Her blue eyes searched mine, and I knew she saw the resoluteness that had settled over me like armor. "Em, I need your help," I said, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of accusations and doubts that spiraled within me. "I need to see the hospital's CCTV footage." She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her sketchbook. "Donald, what do you expect to find?" I leaned forward, intensity burning in my eyes. "Proof," I stated. "Proof that Paul was here with me. They're hiding something, Em, and I intend to find out what." Her brows knitted together, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought, her artist's soul wrestling with the logic of the situation. Finally, with a sigh, she nodded. "All right, Donald, but we do this together. No more lone wolf acts." Together we made our way to the hospital's administrative wing, a labyrinth of corridors that felt more like a prison than a place of healing. The receptionist, a woman with a badge that read Susan, eyed us with suspicion as we approached. "Can I help you?" Susan asked, her voice a practiced melody of courteous detachment. "We need to access the security camera archives," Emily stated, her tone more assertive than her usual light-hearted timbre. Susan's eyes darted between us, a silent calculation taking place behind her professional facade. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible without proper authorization." I stepped in, my determination a palpable force. "Listen, this is important. My son, there was no son in the accident, Mr. Harris." Susan cut in, her words like ice. "The footage will only confirm what we've told you. But I need to see it with my own eyes," I insisted, leaning across the counter, my plea etched with urgency. A heavy sigh escaped Susan, and after a moment's hesitation, her fingers danced across the keyboard. "Follow me," she relented, leading us down a narrow hallway to a room filled with monitors and recording equipment. The footage rolled, a grainy, time-stamped ballet of hospital activity. There was the crash site, the ambulance arrival, the stretcher with my broken body upon it, but no Paul. No small figure, no sign of a child at all. I felt Emily's hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding yet filled with sorrow. "Donald," she whispered, "there's nothing there." The room spun, a carousel of disbelief and betrayal. "No," I choked out, "it can't be. He was with me. He has to be." Monty's voice boomed from the doorway, his figure casting a long shadow across the flickering lights. "Don, you gotta stop this, man. You're tearing yourself apart." I turned to face him, my ally, my friend, yet in that moment, a potential adversary in my quest for truth. "How can I stop when they're lying to us, Monty? There's a cover-up, and I'm going to expose it." Monty shook his head, his expression a mix of frustration and concern. "Or maybe you're just refusing to accept the truth, brother. Maybe it's time to face what really happened." The rift between us widened, a chasm filled with my conspiracy theories and their steadfast grip on a reality that denied Paul's existence. But I would not be swayed. The denial and search had begun, and I would follow it to the ends of the earth if need be. For in my heart, the echo of a child's voice still called to me, a siren song that promised answers just beyond the veil of shadows and doubt. Chapter 5: The First Alliance. "When you first mentioned Paul," Emily began, breaking the silence, "I thought the grief had gotten the better of you. But there's something about the way you speak of him. It's convinced me there's more to this." I leaned in, my perseverance a palpable force in the cramped space of my apartment. "There is more, Em. I can feel it. It's like a current in the air, a story untold." She nodded, her scarf a vivid hodgepodge of colors in the dim light. "So, what's our first move?" "We need to retrace my steps," I said. "Go back to where it all started. There must be something we missed, a clue, a trace of him." Our conversation was a dance of ideas and theories, each more bold and daring than the last. Emily's perspective was a breath of fresh air, her thoughts untainted by the trauma that clouded my own. "You know," she mused, absently twirling a strand of her blonde hair, "we haven't considered public records outside of the city. What if Paul wasn't from here? What if you traveled farther than you remember?" Her words struck a chord, a note of possibility in the hullabaloo of dead ends. "That's it," I exclaimed, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. We've been too narrow in our search. We need to expand our horizons, look beyond the confines of this place. And so we did. We delved into databases and archives, leaving no stone unturned. Hours turned into days, and days bled into nights. We were a team, an alliance forged in the fires of necessity and driven by a shared goal. As we worked, Emily's curiosity became a signpost, guiding us through the mire of bureaucracy and red tape. "There's a pattern here," she said, pointing to a series of discrepancies in the birth records. "It's subtle, but it's there, like someone's trying to cover their tracks." Her insight was a revelation, the first solid lead we had. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spur us forward, enough to fan the embers of hope. "It feels like we're on the brink of something," Emily declared, her voice a mixture of excitement and determination. I couldn't help but agree. We were on a precipice, teetering on the edge of a discovery that could shatter the illusions that had been cast around me. The night grew heavy with anticipation, and within the confines of my apartment, the first alliance was born, a pact between two souls seeking the truth amidst a world that seemed determined to hide it. Emily witnessed my determination, and it kindled a fire within her, a desire to see this through to the end. "We'll find him, Donald, whatever it takes." Her words were a promise, a vow etched in the air between us, and I believed her. Together, we would cut through the fog of lies and deceit. Together, we would bring Paul home. Chapter 6. Through the Looking Glass. We found ourselves outside a school, its red brick facade a silent sentinel to the countless stories held within its walls. Children's laughter cascaded from the playground, a symphony of innocence that pierced the veil of my despair. "Do you think he walked these halls, played on these swings?" Emily asked, her voice subdued as she watched the carefree play. "He might have," I replied, though the words tasted of hope, mingled with the bitterness of doubt. "It's as good a place as any to start." Together, we ventured inside, the echo of our footsteps a distinct separation to the roar of life outside. The corridors were lined with artwork, the vibrant expressions of youthful creativity that stood in stark defiance to the sterility of my recent surroundings. We approached the administrative office, a small room suffused with the scent of copier toner and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. The woman behind the desk, Mrs. Jenkins, regarded us with a practiced eye as we introduced ourselves. "We're looking for information on a child," I began, my voice laced with a desperation I could no longer disguise. "A boy by the name of Paul." Mrs. Jenkins adjusted her glasses, her fingers deftly rifling through a stack of papers. "I'm sorry, but we have hundreds of children pass through these doors. Do you have a last name, a date of birth?" I faltered, the details slipping like sand through my fingers. He would be about 7 years old now," I stammered. Dark hair, bright eyes, a laugh that could light up the darkest room. The description hung in the air, a portrait painted with words, but Mrs. Jenkins shook her head gently. "I'm afraid without more to go on, I can't help you. Privacy policies, you understand." As we left the office, the weight of another dead end settled upon my shoulders, a mantle that threatened to crush the vestiges of my sanity. Yet with each setback, my steadfastness grew stronger, a flame that refused to be extinguished. Emily's hand found mine, her grip firm and reassuring. "We'll find another way," she said. "There's always another way." The city loomed large as we emerged from the school, the afternoon light waning into the deepening blue of twilight. We traversed streets and alleys, parks and plazas, each location a kaleidoscope of possibility that ultimately fractured into the monochrome of reality. At a playground, I paused, watching as a father pushed his son on a swing. The boy's laughter, so pure and unfettered, was a siren's call to my fractured heart. I could almost see Paul there, soaring toward the sky, his joy a tangible thing that I could reach out and touch. "Donald," Emily's voice cut through the mirage, her tone gentle yet insistent. "It's time to go." Reluctantly, I tore my gaze away. The image of the boy on the swing burned into my memory. The boundary between what was real and what was imagined had become a gossamer thread, one that I dared not sever for fear of what might remain. As night fell, the city transformed into a labyrinth of light and shadow, each streetlight a beacon in the encroaching darkness. We walked in silence, our footsteps a steady rhythm that matched the cadence of my heart. "We're close," I murmured, more to myself than to Emily. "I can feel it." She didn't respond, but her presence was a silent vow of solidarity. Together we would continue the search, chasing the echoes of a phantom through the looking glass of a world that seemed to bend and warp with each step we took. And though the line between reality and delusion blurred, my quest for Paul remained as clear as the starlit sky above. Chapter 7. Encounter with Might. We stood before a nondescript doorway, the paint peeling from its frame like dead skin, the thudding bass from within setting the night air aquiver. This was the place, a den of iniquity where information flowed as freely as the cheap liquor that greased the palms of its purveyors. "Are you sure about this?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the blare of the nocturnal cityscape with surgical precision. I nodded, the commitment hardening in my gaze. "Answers lurk in the shadows, Em. We've got to be brave enough to shine a light in the darkness." We stepped through the threshold, the sudden blast of music and smoke disorienting, a sensory assault that threatened to send us reeling. Our eyes adjusted to the dim interior, the squalid bar unfolding before us, a tableau of humanity's baser instincts laid bare. A hulking figure approached, his gait menacing, his intentions inscribed in the very lines of his face. "You two lost?" he growled, the threat in his tone unmistakable. Before we could respond, a familiar voice boomed from the shadows. "They're with me." Monty emerged, his muscular frame an immovable force, the dragon tattoo on his arm seeming to dance with the play of light. The aggressor balked, his bravado deflating as swiftly as it had swelled. "Mont," I greeted him, relief mingling with surprise. "What are you doing here?" He cast a glance at the retreating figure before answering. "Watching your back. Seems you've got a knack for finding trouble." Emily stepped forward, her gratitude evident. "Thank you, Monty. We could have been in over our heads." Monty's deep laugh resonated, the sound rich and warm. "You're on a quest, and every quest needs a little muscle. Count me in." We found a secluded corner, the three of us huddled over a rickety table that seemed to protest under the weight of our mission. Monty's presence brought a new dynamic to our alliance, his physical prowess a stark contrast to our cerebral approach. "You're taking a big risk," I said, acknowledging the danger we all faced. "I've always been a gambler, Don," Monty replied, his gaze steady. "Besides, I can't let you two have all the fun." Emily unfolded a map across the table, the paper creased with the urgency of our endeavor. "We've got leads to follow, places to check, but we'll need to be careful." Monty nodded, his knuckles white as he cracked them with a practiced motion. "Lead the way, and I'll cover your backs." Our conversation was a clash of wills and wisdom, each point debated with the intensity of those who understood the stakes. Monty's perspective was raw and unfiltered, a refreshing lens that stripped away the pretense to reveal the core of our challenges. "We're not just fighting shadows," Monty pointed out, his voice a low rumble. "We're up against people who don't want us to find what we're looking for. And what if we're searching for a ghost?" Emily interjected, her question hanging in the air like a sword of Damocles. I met her gaze, the weight of the unsaid heavy between us. "Then we'll make believers out of them," I declared, my voice a defiant whisper against the tide of uncertainty. As we left the bar, the night had deepened, the darkness a shroud that veiled both predator and prey. We moved through the streets, a trio bound by a common cause, the echo of our footsteps an indication to our unity. Monty walked with the confidence of a man who knew his might, Emily with the grace of an artist who saw the world in strokes of light and shadow, and I with the conviction of a father whose love knew no bounds. Together, we ventured deeper into the city's heart, the seed of conspiracy germinating within us, nourished by the fertile soil of newfound alliance. And though the path ahead was fraught with peril, I knew that with Emily's insight and Monty's strength, the truth of Paul's existence was within our grasp. Chapter 8. The Trio's Tenacity. "All right, we need a strategy," I said, breaking the silence that had settled over us like the dusk. "We're chasing phantoms without a map." Monty's chuckle was low and resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very air. "I've always been more of a punch first, ask questions later type," he mused, the streetlight glinting off his smooth, shaven head. "But I get it. This ain't a fight you can win with fists." Emily leaned against the brick wall, her arms wrapped around her sketchbook, her sanctuary of color in our grayscale world. "We've got more than muscle and dreams," she offered. We've got each other, and that's a lot. I considered her words, the truth of them settling in. Then let's use that. Monty, your strength has gotten us through more than one tight spot already. And Emily, your eye for detail, it's unearthly. They both nodded, a silent acknowledgement of our shared bond. Monty's gaze was a challenge, his stance an embodiment of his steadfast nature. And Don, you've got the heart, he said. It's what's been keeping this whole thing alive. We shared our stories then, tales not of conquest or adventure, but of the threads that wove our lives together. Emily spoke of her art, how it was a lens through which she made sense of the world's chaos. Monty recounted days spent on the door of seedy establishments, the people he'd met, the lives he'd protected. And I spoke of Paul, of the visceral memories that refused to fade, each recollection a brushstroke on the canvas of our quest. It's strange, Emily mused, her voice a melody in the night. We're so different, yet here we are, united by something we can't even see. Sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones forged in the fire of adversity, Monty replied, the metaphor as solid as his presence. Our vow was made then, not with the flourish of signatures or the weight of words, but with the silent promise that resonated in our clasped hands. We would uncover the truth together, no matter the cost. As we parted ways for the night, the city seemed less an adversary and more a puzzle to be solved. Our steps were lighter, our purpose clearer, and the shadows less daunting. The trio's tenacity had become our most potent weapon, and it was with this newfound fortitude that we faced the dawn, ready to challenge the very nature of reality in our search for answers. Chapter 9, Whispers from the Past. We were passing the weathered facade of a small cafe, its vintage sign swinging gently in the evening breeze, when a voice called out, "Donald, is that you?" The voice belonged to Jared, an old friend with whom I had shared countless coffee-fueled debates during our college years. His eyes were the same shade of slate gray, his hair a bit more salt than pepper now, and his easy smile still intact despite the passage of time. "Jared," I replied, my surprise evident. "It's been too long." Emily and Monty exchanged glances as Jared approached, his gait revealing a slight limp he hadn't had before. "I heard about the accident," he said, his voice laced with concern. "How are you holding up?" I was about to reply when Jared's gaze shifted to Emily and Monty, his curiosity piqued. "Friends of yours?" "Yes," I said, introducing Emily and Monty. "We're working on something together." Jared invited us to sit at an outdoor table, the iron chairs scraping against the cobblestones as we made ourselves comfortable. The cafe was mostly empty, the evening patrons yet to arrive, leaving us in a bubble of privacy amid the clinking of dishes from inside. "You look well, Jared," I offered, "though I see life's thrown you a curveball." He chuckled, rubbing at his knee. "Skiing accident," he explained. "But enough about me. I've been hearing things, Donald, about your search. They say you're looking for your son." The way Jared hesitated, the way his eyes didn't quite meet mine, sent a chill down my spine. "Yes," I said, the word feeling like a stone on my tongue. "Paul." Jared leaned in, his expression somber. "Donald, I've known you for years, and I've never once heard you mention a son." I felt Emily's hand on my arm, a silent gesture of support. Monty shifted in his chair, the metal creaking under his weight. "I don't understand," I murmured. "Paul is my life. How can you say that?" Jared's gaze was relentless. "After your wife passed, you changed. We all saw it. But a child? If you had a son, don't you think I would have met him?" His words were a sledgehammer to the fragile edifice of my reality. I had memories, vivid, tangible memories of Paul. Yet here was Jared, a man I trusted, suggesting those memories were false. Maybe you just forgot," I countered, the possibility as flimsy as tissue paper. Jared shook his head. "I think you wanted a son so badly, especially after she died, that your mind made it real." The conversation spiraled, a whirlwind of recollection and refutation. Monty and Emily listened intently, their presence a lifeline as I grappled with Jared's revelations. Each sentence he uttered was a thread pulled from the welter of my narrative, unraveling the story I had clung to so desperately. "Could it be," Emily ventured, her voice a gentle probe, "that the truth lies somewhere between what Jared remembers and what you believe, Donald?" Jared nodded. "Sometimes the mind creates its own reality. You've been through so much, Donald. Maybe it's time to seek some help." Help? The word echoed in my head, mingling with the whispers from the past that now seemed as elusive as shadows at noon. The foundations of my quest were shaking, and I was left to wonder if I had been tilting at windmills all along. As we bid Jared farewell, the setting sun gave way to the first stars of the evening, and the world around us took on the quality of a dream half remembered. I walked in silence between Emily and Monty, the weight of doubt a heavy cloak upon my shoulders. The deepening mystery of my son's existence, or non-existence, loomed over me like a dark cloud. The whispers from the past were growing fainter, and with them the certainty of my purpose. Yet even as despair threatened to take hold, the fire of tenacity within me refused to be extinguished. I would find the truth, no matter how it might shatter my psyche. Chapter 10, Mirror of Memories. Emily, her expression etched with concern, handed me a leather-bound journal, the cover worn from the passage of time. "This might hold some answers," she said, her voice a quiet anchor in the sea of uncertainty. I nodded, my fingers tracing the contours of the embossed title. It was a chronicle of days long gone, a record penned by my own hand. As the pages turned, a narrative unfolded, one devoid of any mention of Paul. Words of loneliness and longing leaped from the pages, a stark difference to the memories that played like an old film in my mind. Monty, ever the sentinel, stood by the attic window, his silhouette a stark outline against the fading light. "You okay, Don?" he rumbled, his eyes reflecting a mix of empathy and apprehension. Flipping through the journal, I stumbled upon a series of photographs tucked between the pages. Here was a younger me, smiling beside friends and family, yet the space where a son might have stood was conspicuously absent. A hollow feeling gnawed at my gut as the implications settled like sediment in still water. "I don't get it," I murmured, the photos a tangible contradiction in my trembling hands. "These are my memories, but he's not here. None of this makes sense." Emily leaned closer, her gaze poring over the captured moments. Could it be that the mind, in its attempt to protect itself, can create a reality so convincing it becomes indistinguishable from the truth? Her words were a scalpel, dissecting the layers of my consciousness in search of the core. "But the memories are so vivid, Emily," I countered, the desperation evident in my voice. "How could I invent a life, a son?" Monty shifted, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. "The mind's a powerful thing, Don. Maybe in the face of loss, it built a fortress for you to hide in, a place where the pain couldn't reach." I sank to my knees, the journal falling from my hands as the weight of their words bore down upon me. Were the recollections of Paul merely phantoms conjured by a psyche too fragile to face reality? The thought was a specter, haunting the edges of my consciousness. "We're here for you, Don," Monty said, extending a hand to help me up. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Emily nodded, her eyes pools of resolve. "There's more to uncover, more pieces to this puzzle. We won't stop until we've found the truth." Their steadfast conviction was a buoy in the fog of doubt that clouded my thoughts. Together we sifted through the artifacts of my past, each item a clue, a fragment of the life I had lived. And with each discovery, the mirror of memories reflected a past that was both familiar and foreign, a landscape that I had traversed yet somehow never known. The attic grew darker as the day waned, the shadows lengthening into spectral fingers that caressed the edges of my resolve. But in the company of Emily and Monty, the darkness was held at bay, their presence a demonstration to the strength found in unity. As we descended the attic stairs, the journal and photographs in tow, I knew that the journey ahead would challenge the very fabric of my being. Yet with each step, I was determined to unravel the enigma of Paul, to discern the echoes of truth from the whispers of a phantom that had become my son. Chapter 11, The Inescapable Revelation. The document was a psychiatric evaluation, dated just months before the accident that had fractured my life. As my eyes traced over the clinical language, the room seemed to constrict around me, the air growing thin. The words on the page bore no mention of Paul, no hint of a son in the narrative of my life. Monty, who had been standing guard by the door, his presence a declaration to his single-minded support, stepped forward. "Don, what's that you've got?" It's an evaluation," I replied, my voice a mere whisper betraying the tumult inside me. From before, it was sealed. I never saw it until now. Emily, her eyes wide with concern, moved closer, her hand reaching out tentatively as if to offer solace without contact. "What does it say, Donald?" The words caught in my throat, a strangled symphony of confusion and despair. "It's about me," I managed to say. "There's no mention of Paul, none, as if he never existed." "Let me see," Monty said, his tone gentle, a bold demarcation to the imposing figure he cut. His eyes scanned the document, absorbing the relentless finality of each sentence. Could they have missed something? Made a mistake? Emily suggested, her voice a hopeful note in the dissonant melody that filled the room. Monty shook his head, his expression somber. "This is thorough, Em. It's not the kind that overlooks details like a sun." The revelation hung in the air between us, a specter that none dared to fully acknowledge. I felt the foundations of my reality crumble, the walls I had built with memories of Paul now revealed as nothing more than facades of self-deception. "But I remember him," I said, my plea sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I remember his laugh, his smile. How can that all be false?" Emily knelt beside me, her hands enveloping mine, her touch grounding. "Memory is a strange creature, Donald. It shapes our reality, but it can also deceive us. Maybe you created Paul in the wake of your grief." "No," I protested, the denial fierce and raw. "He was real. He has to be real." Monty crouched in front of me, his eyes level with mine, searching. "Don, we've been through hell and back on this. If Paul was real, we would have found something by now. Anything." I looked from Monty to Emily, their faces etched with compassion and sorrow. The document in my hand was irrefutable, a clinical dismissal of my son's existence. The room spun, and with it the past several months of searching, yearning for a boy who, in the eyes of the world, was nothing but a phantom. "We need to think about what's best for you now," Emily said softly. "How to heal from this." Heal? The concept seemed alien, a language I had yet to learn. My psyche, once so sure of its reality, now teetered on the brink of collapse. The three of us remained there, locked in the gravity of the moment. The inescapable revelation had laid bare the chasm within me, and as the storm of denial and acceptance clashed, I knew that the journey ahead would be one of reconstruction, of learning to live in a world where the echoes of a phantom son would forever haunt the corridors of my mind. Chapter 12: Descent into the Abyss. Monty and Emily stood beside me, their faces etched with concern, as I paced the length of my disheveled living room, each step a march in a parade of despair. The walls, once adorned with pictures of a life I believed to have lived, now seemed to mock me with their bareness. "I can't do this," I confessed, my voice a ragged whisper lost amidst the chaos of my thoughts. "Everything I thought I knew, everything I've been fighting for, it's all a lie." Emily stepped forward, her hand reaching out before she seemed to think better of it and let it fall to her side. "Donald, you're not alone in this. We want to help you through it." Her words, meant to offer solace, felt like a lifeline made of spider silk, too fragile to hold the weight of my anguish. Monty's heavy hand settled on my shoulder, a grounding force in the maelstrom that had become my existence. "Look at me, Don," Monty urged, his voice firm yet not unkind. "You've hit rock bottom, sure, but that means the only way left is up." How? The question was a plea, a cry for a map to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of my shattered mind. How do I climb out of this abyss when I don't even trust my own memories? From the depths of my despair, a knock at the door cut through the fog. Dr. Adler, my longtime therapist, stood in the threshold, an unexpected yet not unwelcome visitor. Her arrival was a flicker of light in the impenetrable gloom that had settled over me. "Donald, may I come in?" Dr. Adler's tone was gentle, a balm to the raw edges of my frayed nerves. I nodded mutely, stepping aside to allow her entry into the chaos of my home, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within. As she surveyed the scene, her gaze held neither judgment nor pity, only an unfaltering willpower to guide me back from the brink. "Your friends contacted me," she explained, nodding to Emily and Monty. "They're worried about you, and rightly so. I'm here to help." The conversation that followed was a lifeline thrown into the stormy waters of my soul. Dr. Adler's words were a lighthouse guiding me away from the jagged rocks of my own mind. She spoke not only of loss and grief, but of elasticity and the enduring strength of the human spirit. "You've constructed a narrative to cope with unimaginable pain," Dr. Adler said, her voice cutting clear and true. But now it's time to reconstruct, to build something new from the pieces. But Paul, I began, the name a sacred incantation, never existed, she finished for me. And that's a reality you must come to terms with. But the love, the care you've shown, that's very real. It's a declaration to your capacity for compassion. Monty and Emily remained by my side, pillars of support in my moment of need. Their presence was a silent vow that I would not face this journey alone. As the night deepened, the rapid pace of my thoughts began to slow, the tumultuous sea within me calming as I clung to the lifeline they offered. Dr. Adler's therapeutic intervention was the first step on a long road to healing, a path I would tread with trepidation but not without hope. The chapter of Paul had closed, a book sealed and shelved, but my story was not yet over. There were blank pages yet to be filled, a narrative yet to be written, and with the help of my friends and the guidance of Dr. Adler, I would write a tale of recovery, of rediscovery, and of rebirth. The descent into the abyss was harrowing, but the climb out would be a declaration to the indomitable will of a man who faced the void and dared to return. Chapter 13, Mending the Torn Fabric. Emily and Monty had become my steadfast companions through this odyssey of the soul. They were the ballast that kept my ship from capsizing in the tempest of my own making. As we sat at the weathered oak table in my kitchen, the remnants of breakfast before us, the air was thick with the anticipation of the day's agenda. "We've got your therapy session today, Don," Emily reminded me, her voice a gentle nudge toward the reality I now faced. Dr. Adler mentioned she's got a new approach she'd like to try. I nodded, my hands wrapped around a mug of steaming coffee, the heat a comforting contrast to the chill that had settled in my bones. "I'm ready," I said, though the tremor in my voice betrayed the fear lurking beneath the surface. Monty's deep chuckle rumbled through the room, a sound that once would have set the walls shaking with its resonance. "You sound like a man about to walk the plank." I couldn't help but smile, the levity a welcome reprieve from the gravity of our conversation. "Perhaps I am," I conceded, "but at least I'm not walking it alone." The drive to Dr. Adler's office was a journey in more ways than one, the cityscape outside the car window a blur of motion and life that I was only now rejoining. The office itself was a haven of tranquility, the soft hues of the walls and the gentle hum of the white noise machine designed to soothe frayed nerves. Dr. Adler greeted us with a nod, her demeanor professional, yet not without warmth. "Today," she began, once we were all seated in the comforting embrace of her office, "we'll be working on narrative therapy. It's about reauthoring your story, Donald. Acknowledging the past, but not letting it dictate your future." The session unfolded, a scramble of spoken word and silent reflection. I spoke of Paul, not as a son ripped from my life, but as a manifestation of my deepest desires, a child born of grief and nurtured by a mind seeking solace in fantasy. "It's a strange thing," I mused, "to mourn the loss of someone who never truly existed." Emily leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "But the love you felt, that was real. And it's that capacity for love that will see you through this." Monty, ever the pragmatist, added, "You've got a chance to rebuild, Don. Brick by brick. It won't be the same as before, but maybe that's not such a bad thing." The conversation turned to the support group that we were to attend later that afternoon, a collective of souls each bearing their own scars and stories. As we walked into the nondescript community center, the scent of stale coffee and the sound of quiet murmurs welcomed us. The group was a microcosm of the world outside, each member a reflection of the pain and flexibility inherent to the human condition. As I listened to their stories, I found fragments of my own experiences reflected back at me. There was solace in shared suffering, a communal balm for wounds too long left festering. When it came my turn to speak, the words flowed like a river breaking through a dam. My name is Donald, and for the longest time I believed I had a son named Paul. The group listened, their faces a mosaic of empathy and understanding. As I recounted my tale, the burden of my grief grew lighter, the act of sharing and unburdening of the soul. As the session came to a close and the group members dispersed, a sense of accomplishment settled over me. It was a small victory, perhaps, but in the battle for my sanity, every triumph was a cause for celebration. Emily, Monty, and I walked back to the car, the setting sun casting long shadows on the pavement. You did good today, Don, Monty said, clapping me on the back. Yes, Emily agreed, her smile a radiant thing in the twilight. Today was just one step on a long journey, but you're on the right path. I gazed up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to twinkle into existence, and I felt a stirring within me. It was the birth of hope, fragile and fledgling, but alive nonetheless. The path to recovery was fraught with emotional setbacks and breakthroughs, a road marked by the potholes of past mistakes and the promise of new beginnings. Yet as I stood there, flanked by two of the truest friends a man could ask for, I knew that the fabric of my life was being rewoven, stronger and more vibrant than ever before. The echoes of a phantom sun would always resonate within me, but they no longer defined me. I was Donald, mending the torn fabric of his life, and with each stitch, I was becoming whole again. Chapter 14: The Dawning of Hope. As I made my way to the community center, the place that had become a sanctuary for souls adrift, I sensed a shift within me. The air felt different somehow, charged with a subtle energy that whispered of changes yet to come. Monty walked beside me, his stride confident, his demeanor that of a sentinel guarding a newfound calm. Emily flanked my other side, her presence a quiet reminder of the survivability of the human spirit. I never thought I'd see the day, Monty rumbled, a note of pride in his voice. You, standing tall, ready to help others find their way. Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft hue of the sky. It's not just about finding a way, Monty. It's about forging a new path, one that we create for ourselves. The community center buzzed with the energy of anticipation as people gathered, drawn by the promise of shared burdens and collective healing. I took a seat in the circle of chairs, the faces around me a mosaic of experiences and hope. A woman across from me, her eyes a well of sorrows, spoke first. My name is Linda, and I'm trying to navigate a world without my husband. He was my compass, and now I'm lost. Her words resonated within me, a familiar echo of my own disorientation. I cleared my throat, ready to share the insights that had been hard-won through my own journey into the abyss. Linda, I began, my voice steady and evidence to the ground I had gained. When we lose someone, we fear that we might lose ourselves along with them. But what I've learned is that we carry them with us, in the lessons they taught us, and in the love they left behind. Nods of agreement rippled through the group, and another spoke, a young man named Carlos, his story a conglomerate of struggle and the fierce will to survive. You talk about lessons in love, Carlos said, his tone searching. But how do you move past the anger? The feeling that you've been robbed? I met his gaze, acknowledging the rawness of his query. Carlos, the anger is a fire that can consume you if you let it. I've been there, standing in the flames. But with time and help, I learned to use that fire to let it forge something stronger within me. The conversation ebbed and flowed, a river of shared humanity that carved out a space for healing. Emily and Monty contributed their own perspectives, their voices adding depth to the chorus of recovery. As the session drew to a close, a sense of accomplishment enveloped the room, the kind that comes from bearing one's soul and finding it reflected in the eyes of others. We stood, a community bound by the threads of our shared shuffle, stronger for the weaving. Monty clapped me on the shoulder as we exited the center, the gesture speaking volumes. You're a lighthouse, Don, a lighthouse in the storm. Emily linked her arm with mine, her touch light but anchoring. And you've helped light the way for others, Donald. That's no small feat. The day waned, its light fading into the soft glow of twilight, and as I walked home with my friends, the path before me felt less daunting. The dawning of hope had broken the horizon, casting its rays upon the road ahead, illuminating a future where my obsession had become my wisdom, my loss a foundation upon which to build a life redefined. In the quiet of my own heart, I knew that uncertainty would always be a companion, but it was no longer an adversary. It was simply a part of the journey, a reminder that life, in all its complexity, was a gift to be cherished, a story to be continued. And as the stars began to dot the sky, I stepped forward, a man reborn, ready to embrace whatever came next. Chapter 15: Emerging from Shadows. The sign on the door, freshly painted and unassuming, read Haven for Healing, Grief Counseling, and Support. It was here, in this sanctuary, birthed from the remnants of my own shattered illusions, that I would serve as a balefire to those navigating the murky waters of loss. Monty and Emily had been instrumental in bringing this vision to life, their unflappable support the bedrock upon which I built my new purpose. They stood by me now, Monty with his bear-like presence filling the doorway, and Emily, her artistic sensibilities infusing the space with a serenity that belied the rawness of the work to be done. "You've really done it, Don," Monty said, his baritone voice tinged with admiration. "From the ashes, huh?" Emily brushed a lock of blonde hair from her face, her blue eyes surveying the room. "It's perfect, Donald. A place to start anew." I took in the room with its comforting shades of blue and green, the circle of chairs that awaited the arrival of those seeking solace, and the bookshelves lined with texts on healing and personal growth. "It's more than a place," I replied. "It's an evidence to the journey, from the depths of a personal abyss to emerging into the light." The door opened with the soft chime of a bell, heralding the arrival of the first soul brave enough to seek guidance. She was a middle-aged woman, her features drawn with the telltale signs of sleepless nights and the burden of grief. As she introduced herself as Joan, her voice faltered, the weight of her story momentarily too heavy to bear. "I lost my daughter," she began, the words a dam breaking within her. "And I feel like I've lost myself along with her." I rose, extending a hand of welcome, the gesture one of solidarity. "Joan, I may not know the exact contours of your pain, but I understand the loss. This is a safe harbor for you." As we talked, the conversation meandering through the intricacies of her experience, I found myself not as a wounded man clinging to the vestiges of a broken past, but as a guide, a fellow traveler offering a compass to those still lost at sea. Emily interjected with gentle questions, her intuition guiding Joan toward the expression of her pent-up anguish. Monty's occasional nods and murmurs of encouragement provided a foundation of strength upon which the fragile beginnings of trust could be built. Time passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, casting the room in a brighter light, a physical metaphor for the journey from darkness into day. More people arrived, each a different story, a different phantom they carried, and to each I offered the insights of my own passage through the shadowed valley of grief. As the session drew to a close, the participants lingered, not quite ready to leave the cocoon of understanding we had woven. It was then that I realized the magnitude of what had been created here, in this humble space. "You've given us something precious, Donald," Joan said, her voice stronger now, the edges of her sorrow not so jagged. "You've given us hope." The others echoed her emotion, their words a chorus of gratitude that filled the room and lifted my heart. In their faces, I saw reflections of myself, of the man who had once been consumed by the specter of a son who never was, now reborn as a guide, a mentor, a friend. As they filed out, their goodbyes a promise of return, I turned to Emily and Monty, my companions on this journey from the abyss to the apex of a dream realized. "We've done something good here," I said, a smile finding its way to my lips. Emily squeezed my hand, her eyes shining, "And this is just the beginning." Monty nodded, his gaze fixed on some distant point, as if envisioning the countless lives that would be touched within these walls. "To new beginnings," he said. I looked out the window, the cityscape an oddment of lives intertwined, each carrying their own hidden phantoms. But here, in this place of emerging light, we would chase away the shadows together. And so, with the dawning of hope in our hearts, we stepped forward into the rest of our lives, each day a new chapter in a story that continued to unfold in ways we never could have imagined. The end. Thank you for being part of Shattered Psyche with us. Trust in StoryWave AI to transform your creative prompts into compelling stories. Show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Daily stories await to whisk you away. April 2024. Goodbye for now.